year we're focusing on the intersection of public engagement and diversity, equity, and inclusion by highlighting collaborations that advance these important U of M initiatives. Today you'll hear from 4 faculty presenters who represent different fields and have all engaged with the public in unique and innovative ways, tapping into the strong infrastructure University of Michigan offers to support the important work of our faculty leaders. We're going to start today with Dr. Keitra Armstrong from the School of Kinesiology, who will share about her experience developing a teach-out with academic innovation. Next, we will hear from Dr. Paul Fleming from the School of Public Health for his powerful work tapping into the Ginsberg Center's resources and network. He will be followed by Dr. Mara Ostfeld from LS&A Political Science, who has provided powerful experiences for her students through her work with SEAL. And we'll end with Dr. John Montgomery from LS&A Chemistry, sharing about chemistry outreach initiatives, including his participation in CEO's Wolverine Express, which inspired high school visits with undergraduates from his CSP classes and graduate students from his research lab. We hope that these talks spark a meaningful discussion and ideas for those of you in the audience. We'll end today's session briefly sharing about U of M resources and offices to tap into, including this event's co-sponsors, the Office of Academic Innovation, the Ginsberg Center, SEAL, which is Community Engaged Academic Learning, and the Center for Educational Outreach. And then we'll have a networking reception for deeper informal conversations. So with that, you know what you're getting into, and I'm going to invite Dr. Keitra Armstrong up to get us started.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Okay, look, I know it's cold outside, but I need a little bit more warmth in here. So, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Okay, thank you for showing me love. I appreciate that. So, I'm going to take a few minutes to share with you my initiative on free speech in sport. And to do so, this is who I am, I need to give you some context. Some of you may remember the situation where Trayvon Martin was walking in the streets of Stanford, Florida. Actually, he was in the neighborhood. And Zimmerman, who's a mixed race Hispanic male, actually fatally shot him. And Zimmerman says it's because he felt his life was threatened, even though Trayvon Martin, the African-American male, did not have a weapon. And so at the end of the day, on July 13, 2013, Zimmerman was acquitted. And this is what started this whole reemergence of this movement. And so what happened, black athletes started to respond. And so you can see the Miami Heat, they started this movement, we want justice. Another example, you see some of the athletes wearing the hood saying, I am Trayvon Martin. You also see some of the professional athletes, because of the situation where Michael Brown was shot when he had his hands up. And so the athletes were paying tribute to that, saying, for Michael Brown. Also, we see a number of other teams that did this. Another example, when Eric Gardner was also a black male who was killed, and you could hear him saying, I can't breathe, but he was killed. And so you see some of the athletes paying a tribute to that with this t-shirt, I can't breathe. A number of athletes. So, the situation of racial injustice is not something that's new to the U.S. And it is not something that has evaded athletes. Many of the athletes are from the communities where those victims are from. And so Colin Kaepernick says, I'm not going to stand up to show pride in a flag for a country that oppresses black people and people of color. So he is also protesting. Now remember in the previous slides I showed you, those athletes were also protesting, but they were doing so with their attire or with their gestures. So what's the issue with Colin? He decides to protest by kneeling during the national anthem. And this is what created the uprising. It started a movement. Women's sports, high school sports, college sports, professional sports, this whole movement. During the national anthem, people started to kneel. Also, college bands were starting to kneel. So now we have this movement. And it wasn't even far from our own campus. Our football team also had expressions of protest during the national anthem. So it created this debate, 2017-18, and the debate continues. This is to my far right is the commissioner of the NFL. And so how do you manage these expressions that are happening during your event, during your commercial property? And then we have a president saying, well, if you don't stand for the flag, you don't belong in this country. And he said some other things that are beyond the nature of this presentation. And so it became a national debate about kneeling. People say it's a disgrace, it's un-American, it's disrespectful to our veterans. Sport is not the platform. We came to sport to release. We don't want to see this political expression. And there were many others. But then on the other side, people were saying, but athletes have a right not to stand. It's not about the flag. And others were saying, well, why are we celebrating the Star Spangled Banner? The lyrics are racist anyway, if you've read them in their entirety. And then others said, well, why are you criticizing because this person is kneeling? Kneeling is typically a sign of respect. And then you kind of see this. It's almost, I don't know how well you can see it in the back, but there's a white female saying, Kaepernick, have you thanked the veteran? Telling him that he's disrespecting the flag. But yet you see a black female saying, thank you, Kaepernick. So like, I'm getting excited now because my research is on the area of race and sport. And this is so much about race in many regards. So I'm thinking, how do I get in this conversation? So I was thinking, they're having all these conversations, but their voice is missing. And how are they framing it? How do I take part in that? So you want to know how I did it? There's a Teach Out series. So thankfully, there's a Teach Out. Let me tell you what it is for those of you who don't know. Teach Outs are free. They're open to the public. They're brief. They don't last very long. They're not courses. They're really like events. They're focused on engagement, more participatory than assessment. Very inclusive. It's a global community. Diversity of perspectives there. It's connected to the campus. It allows for a platform for further engagement. And it features actions, a call to action. And one of the benefits of the Teach Out is that it gives you this world view, but it also lets you see the public narratives and how they're framed to create different messages. So at the University of Michigan, I was really fortunate to participate in the series on free speech, the Teach Out series on free speech. There was one on free speech on campus, free speech in journalism, and I'm a sport management professor here, so mine was free speech in sport. So let me tell you what the intent of my Teach Out was. Number one, I needed an academic frame for the discussion. I also needed a scholarly lens for the critique of this whole notion of free speech in sport. And then I wanted to add an assortment of academic voices. So how did I do it? I was really, really lucky to find people who were willing to share with me different perspectives. So I listened to the veterans. I interviewed veterans. And I was like, how do you feel when you see people kneeling? And they were able to share their perspectives. I also interviewed a faculty member who does research on the national anthem. And I asked, what's the history and why are we even playing the national anthem in sport? I interviewed a sociologist, a person that teaches sports sociology, and he talks about the notion of social movements. And I interviewed a political science professor to talk about social movements. The thing that I enjoyed the most, I featured a roundtable of the Michigan student athletes. Powerful information about how they feel and how they're treated, how they're dehumanized and not supposed to have a voice and not supposed to be affected when they go to communities and their brothers and their sisters are treated with racial injustice. It was such a powerful experience. I also asked a faculty member here whose focus is on sport consumer behavior. Like, well, how do fans respond to this? How do they make peace with seeing an athlete on their favorite team do something they don't like? How do they reckon with that cognitive dissonance that they feel as a consumer? And we talked about it. I also looked at the political, legal implications. What is free speech? What does it mean? What rights do athletes have? And then lastly, I interviewed a person that worked with professional team owners. Do team owners have a responsibility to be socially responsible to their communities, to their fans who are subject to racial injustice? And it was a very interesting conversation. So this is how I tried to frame my notion of free speech in sport. Now, what I want you to understand, the participants were very diverse and geographically dispersed. But there were sport administrators, there was a pharmacist, which was really kind of interesting. There's a pharmacist there, there's an attorney. But you see the diversity. I don't have this kind of diversity in my classes at the University of Michigan. So it gave me a chance to have outreach and engagement with stakeholders and people and ideologies that I would have never had access to. And it also broadened the reach. There were a lot of people from the US, but also many people from various parts of the world. And you can see the diversity there. What did I learn? There were lots of perspectives. There were some people who were curious about what constituted free speech. We talked about silent forms of protest. I asked them things about expression beyond speech. What was acceptable? Many of them were saying that it's acceptable if it doesn't interfere with the game. And so there were lots of perspectives of what that meant. I asked them, was sport a viable platform? Some of them said yes, because sport was something that it had publicity and that it was a great way of getting people's attention. And I learned a lot more. In addition to that, we asked them for some calls to action. One person said every sport team in the US, if they concern themselves with social justice, will have change. Another one said, when you see young people trying to come to terms with something, don't try to put them in a box, but listen. Understand the nature of their struggle. Another one was talking about being respectful when we look at free speech. Just a few more. Differences is not the same as being wrong. Step out of your own world, look into someone else and try to understand what they're doing. And then the last one, our country isn't this sacred object, nor is it the Star Spangled Banner or the flag, but it's what we all do collectively as citizens. We all need to stand up for justice. So these were just a very short snippet of the types of call to actions that were generated from my teach out. So let me tell you what surprised me really quickly is, I know so much of this was about race, but the participants really didn't dig in and talk about race. So I consider it race muted. The only two people that talked about racial justice were really the professors of law and the sociology professor. So that was the part that disappointed me. Let me tell you what the implications were for me. Number one, it gave me a whole worldwide classroom. It extended my classroom to the whole world. It informed my teaching. I teach a class on leadership and diversity in sport. I teach a class on race in sport. And that content is very rich for the class that I teach. But it also has informed my scholarship. We're analyzing data now. I'm writing a book right now on theorizing race in sport. And so it really, that information is really contributing to me in a very profound professional way. But more importantly, it allowed me to center the voices of University of Michigan faculty, staff, and our student athletes. So how did I do all of this as I wind up here? It was made possible, brought to you by academic innovation. I cannot say enough about the AI team. In fact, I renamed them. The AI is awesome, intentionally. There's no accident that they do what they do. The infrastructure, the resources, the overall professional support, and let me not underestimate the fun. Like, we're friends now. I got new friends in the university because of this. They made it fun. And you know what else? It was a phenomenal experience for me. A great deal of phenomenal experience has fostered in me a flexibility of the mind, imagination that some might call madness. But it's an inspired madness. I want to do it again. I had a lot of fun. It helped me, it contributed to my research, and it allowed me to touch the world in my own little way. So I encourage you to think about academic innovation as a unique way of reaching out to the public, engaging with the public, and really having a chance to expand your reach. One of the best things about education is we can change the world one mind at a time. This teach out allowed me to touch some minds. And let me tell you the best part, you don't even have to have experience. I knew nothing about all this technical AI stuff when I went there, but they did it for me. They were such a great support for me, and I encourage you to think about this as well as you think about public engagement and outreach. Thanks for listening.
So thank you so much for letting me be here and to share this work. I have to say, when I was first told about this opportunity, my first reaction was like terror that other people would find out about Denise and Seal and I would never have the same access to her and the incredible resources that she really provided me. A lot of us as academics are not trained how to teach, and so to have someone sit down and listen to like your interests and your dreams and your aspirations for teaching and help you actually develop a plan for how to make that all come to fruition was really invaluable. I actually came to Denise after I was inspired, or I've been inspired by this figure right here. And this inspires a lot of my work. And what I see, and I hope other people see with this, is the enormous growth in the share of Latino eligible voters in the US and their enormous potential to affect American democracy. But at the same time as that number is growing, the bottom line in terms of how many Latinos are actually voting is staying relatively flat, which means the proportion of Latinos actually participating, especially in off-year elections, is actually declining. And that has enormous implications for a system of governance that's based on people participating, in a system of governments that puts forth policies that are based on people electing representatives that they believe will put forth policies that are in their interest. And so I see this and I am mobilized, deeply disconcerted, and driven a lot by this figure. The problem is that what happens when most students see this figure is what happened to a lot of you, is that people's eyes glaze over. And so I came to Denise with all of this passion at the Center for Engaged Academic Learning, and she sat down and she listened to me and she helped me transform all of my passions into something that was actually pedagogically useful. And so what she helped me come up with was a really cool course on how we can train students to think about this problem that faces our democracy and develop their own theories and test their own theories, and how we can increase Latino political engagement. So the course starts off with students doing their own research on a Latino dense community and theories of what increases political participation and what affects Latino specific political participation. So we spend the first part of the course just doing research on Latino communities and the history of Latino political engagement. Students then have the chance to come up with their own theories, draw from past work, what's been done on Latinos, what hasn't been done on Latinos, what do they think would be relevant to this particular community that we're doing this class in, and come up with their own theories. What's an intervention? How can I contact Latinos and make them think about political engagement differently? What would be effective in the context of this community that we're going into? Then they field their plan. They come up with their own plan, and then we did door-to-door canvassing, first in Southwest Detroit and then in this past election in Lansing, and they came up with their own plan about what would increase Latino political participation in these communities. And now we're in the final end where they're analyzing their own data. These are rates of turnout in 2018. We compare them to control precincts, and then turnout in 2014 in the last mid-year election. And so the goal is that they can come up with their own plan and then analyze it and interpret the results. So this is all great, but it kind of undermines what Denise and Seal contributed to this. And again, I want to emphasize that a lot of us as academics are really trained in the nuances of what we study, but have no idea. And as a political scientist, I can speak on behalf of our discipline and say we are not the most effective communicators. And so I have no idea how to relay this to students. So she not only helped me think through that, but also a lot of other components of the course. The course was heavily based on team-based learning, right? So students worked in groups. They were assigned a precinct, and then they had to work very closely in a very intense context, doing door-to-door canvassing all day with a group. So she helped me think through how to train students to do that effectively. And that's an enormously useful skill, obviously in the context of my class, but that's an enormously useful lifelong skill for whatever profession they go into. So she did a workshop in my class training students to think about effective team-based learning. We also had another member of her team, Nitesh, come into my class and think through the ethics of engaging with communities that we are not from. And while many students were from Michigan or Lansing or Detroit or Latinx or low income or whatever, they may have commonalities, there was numbers of differences. And so the ethics of learning across difference in a way that's not exploitative, and the ethics of serving in a way that really imparts value on the communities that we are entering into. And so Nitesh came and did an amazing workshop and thinking through and critically processing, how can we do this in a way that we can learn from, in a way that imparts value. They also, as someone who's not from Michigan, I had these great goals and she came up with this great idea, but I don't know other outreach organizations in these areas. I'm not from Detroit. I don't know who's doing this work or what other organizations are already in operation did there. And Denise did. She already had contacts with organizations that were doing door-to-door canvassing and doing political advocacy. And she had contact with organizations that were willing and able to work with students and University of Michigan faculty. And that was enormously helpful and just took a huge burden off of me in terms of developing these new relationships. And of course, funding, man. We all need funding. But I want to say the cost of transportation to Detroit and Lansing was great. And so her ability to help cover those costs was really helpful. She also was able to pay for someone who studies Latino political behavior or Latino political outreach, and we had read a lot of the work. And then they Skyped into the class and they read the student proposals and they commented on the student proposals. So it really empowered students to think of themselves as not just people who receive information on the subject, but can engage with it in a critical and thoughtful way. And that was really meaningful to a lot of the students. And finally, this last time we did this, each student was given $200. Each student group was given $200 in developing their own proposal. So some students had decided that to most effectively increase Latino political participation, we know theories of reciprocity are really valuable. So I know if I give you something, then you often feel inclined to want to do something back. So maybe that'd be if I give people something like a t-shirt that says, Votamos Michigan, or whatever, something like that, then maybe that will be something useful. So that's what they came up with. It was based on sound theory, and then they had the funding to actually get those t-shirts and test that theory. And so that was also really empowering to students. And it wasn't a huge cost, but it was really impactful. So again, we did this in Southwest Detroit in the context of the local elections in 2017. And then we did it in Lansing, which is in Michigan's 8th congressional district, which was one of the closest congressional races in the country during the 2018 midterm elections. And it was really meaningful there because they have a small but growing Latino population that no one was doing outreach to. And so we were able to really engage with that community in a meaningful way. So that's great. We did it. I feel good. It was super interesting to me. But was it interesting and meaningful to the students should be an important question after something like this. And so Denise also taught me how to do reflections in a way that was really valuable in assessing what was good and what was not effective about this course. I'm just going to include the positive reflections here. One thing is the value of learning and the ability to learn through service. So one of these quotes is from a student, the top one in red is from a student who identified as coming from a relatively upper class background. And he came in, and we all come into every context and every community with our own assumptions. And he talked about the value of this class and changing the assumptions that he had. He said, in my prior experiences canvassing, the area has typically been a middle to upper class residential area with little to no diversity. So for us to get out the vote in an area that is typically overlooked and underrepresented in the Hispanic community was truly eye-opening and perspective changing. And it was really valuable to have students say, I went in with this assumption, and to say they were comfortable being like, I was wrong, and that changed. Another student talked about his assumptions about people who didn't participate in politics and why they didn't participate. And he said, if there was one time that I had doubt that people in the community were willing to vote, it was at one household where a lady was doing dishes and ignored the door completely. However, the son arrived at the home of the lady and told us that his parents did not answer the door, not because of what he assumed, that they just don't care about politics, but because they do not speak English and are afraid of answering the door. So it allowed for these really personal and humbling experiences with people that a lot of the students often don't interact with. We also allowed students to serve across difference. So a lot of the students were like, I don't speak Spanish, I'm not going to be able to bring any value to these communities. And so there's always going to be communication, and I tried to emphasize there's always communication barriers, not just because you don't speak the language, but there's various kinds of communication barriers we all face, and that should never be a barrier for you trying to serve and give. And so it was valuable when I had a student who said, Lauren had written a Spanish version of our script, so it was really cool to see her be able to actually use it. The woman also asked Lauren a lot of questions, and it was really cool to be able to see that Lauren was able to be a resource for this woman and answer her questions. So some students just derived a lot of value to seeing that they could connect with people that they often felt they couldn't communicate or contact with or have contact with. And another goal was just to allow students to feel like they can engage with important social issues. They're not just people who have to sit back on the sidelines and watch as these important things happen, but they can actually have an impact on these matters that are affecting our nation in a lot of ways. So one student talked about how she felt very shy speaking to strangers and feared that she would make a mistake or forget something, but throughout the day she started to feel more confident. Another student talked about how the fact that I became so invested in the project surprised me because I never imagined I would enjoy canvassing or how simple it really is to have small but important impacts on communities. And so that was kind of representative of a lot of feedback that we got. It was easily a college experience that I will never forget. So unquestionably, it took a lot of time, but as someone who, again, isn't trained in teaching, it made the experience of teaching so much more valuable and so much more enjoyable. And so I encourage you to talk to Denise and Seal, but not too much, because I plan on doing this again.
Yeah, so I'm Paul Fleming. I work at the School of Public Health, and I wanted to kind of share a little bit about kind of how I've brought public engagement and DE&I principles together into a course that I teach. As Nirja mentioned, a lot of my research focuses on areas of public engagement in terms of community-based participatory research. So my projects focus on roots of health inequities and working in community partnerships to address some of these inequities that we see here in Michigan. And so, for example, one of my projects, we're looking at root cause of health inequity being immigration enforcement policies, and so I partner with CHAS in Detroit, Packard Health, Washtenaw County Health Department, and the Washtenaw Health Plan, working all together in collaboration to look at how these community partners can respond to increasing immigration enforcement and how that harms community members. And so given that this is sort of the research I focus on, I'm also very interested in how do I bring these community partnership angles into the classroom with me. So as Nirja mentioned, some of this research is supported by the Ginsberg Center, but I'm actually going to focus today on more the teaching side of things. So I started here at the University of Michigan about 2.5 years ago. And at that time, it was a very interesting time. So I started right in the middle of the 2016 election. So I started that August, and then a few months later, there was the election and all of the aftermath there. I haven't been around long enough to know exactly what was happening before, but I know there was, in 2016, 17, numerous racist incidents on campus, many of them stemming or related to the election or in response to the election. And so there was a lot of attention and focus on not only the racism that was kind of growing in the country, or at least being more publicized or more kind of talked about in the country, but then also on campus. So not to say that those things were new in 2016, but they were being talked about quite a bit and affecting folks in our campus community. And right around that time also, about a month after I started, the university officially launched its Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Strategic Plan. So this was kind of all happening right as I was excited, new professor starting here on campus. And perhaps because I was new, perhaps because I'm relatively close in age to students, perhaps because I was a very eager young new professor, but many students during this period were reaching out to me, wanting to talk to me, and they were seeing the racist incidents on campus, what was going on in the national news and the politics, and they were coming to talk to me looking for leadership and guidance on what do we do, how do we respond, how am I supposed to cope with this? And that was at that time that I realized, similar to what Mara was saying, of just how poorly a PhD program equips you for those types of things. So I started to recognize in that first year some of my own inadequacies in training. So yes, I had the desire to help and work with these students, but I didn't necessarily feel like I had the training or resources to do so, and I was in a completely new environment. So that was part of my first year, and right around that fall also, my department approached me and said, we actually need to switch your teaching assignments, and we want you to teach the required 92-person course that nobody else really wants to teach because it's extremely challenging to teach. So again, I was still relatively eager, so I was kind of excited about the opportunity. Oh, I can take this on, right? And the class was, so again, it was 92 students all in one sort of lecture hall, and it was planning health promotion programs. So this is one of the fundamental kind of skill sets in my particular department, which is health behavior and health education in the School of Public Health. So I was excited about the opportunity to be teaching this kind of core fundamental issue, have all of our graduate students in one room. I think there's a lot of there was a lot of excitement that I was feeling about that opportunity. At the same time, I was extremely nervous and scared and wasn't really sure how things would go. At that moment, I was really leaning on folks within my department, and of course they were helpful. They helped guide me on how to come together and approach this class. What I was excited about is that teaching this concept of planning a public health program inherently is about working in partnership with communities. So as part of this class, issues of ethics, ethical community engagement, issues of identity, issues of inequality are inherently part of this class. So I was excited that that was some of the topics I got to cover. And so in that first semester, you know, I did consult a bit with CRLT, but really I was leaning on sort of senior faculty in the department, thinking that they were kind of the resource that I needed. I taught the class. I survived. I survived through reading the course evaluations. But yes, it was tough. There were so many challenges. Some of my reflections after the class, I was really surprised at. So I had students work in groups during that semester, and there was a lot of in-group fighting. And not to say that that was completely surprising, but it was an issue that I hadn't really wrestled with how to deal with. And then that first time I taught it, the students were working on a hypothetical health issue. And they were working with hypothetical community partners, and they were creating a hypothetical program. And I think as a result, students, some of the reactions I got was, you know, these topics were not going deep enough. This sort of seems obvious. Of course you do ethical community engagement. Of course you ask community partners about what they think. Of course you do this, that, and the other thing. So we weren't really reaching that kind of point of the really complicated part of working with partnerships. And so again, once I had time for those course reviews to settle, got that semester behind me, that summer, I really started to think of, okay, I have a fresh new opportunity with this class, and it was at that point that I reached out to the Ginsberg Center to help me figure out what to do. So I reached out to Nirja, who's Associate Director for Teaching and Research at the Ginsberg Center. And really, I think this image is what that meeting was. So we sat there and we put our brains together, and Nirja has so much experience and so much her job is focused on these community partnerships and how the university can partner. And I myself, I have a background, you know, of working with community organizations, working in partnerships. And so when I think about my dream way of teaching this class, of course we're out in the community. We're not sitting in that lecture hall. We're not only talking about the hypothetical, we're actually doing. And so I had an opportunity to sit down with Nirja and kind of communicate my vision, but then also get into the nitty-gritty of making it reality. Because one of the things I did not realize as a new professor was, sure, I had worked with community partners, but it's very different to be doing so as a professor in a class or to be guiding students through that process. So I had done it individually, but it's much different to do it in a class. And so it was great to lean on the expertise of Ginsberg Center and Nirja in particular. So what, you know, again, we had this meeting of the minds where I was sharing my vision and she was kind of, you know, walking through concrete examples of, well, you could do this, you could do that, and kind of, we were just playing off each other to come up with sort of a new format for this class, or at least a new way to approach it. What I ultimately landed on with the help of those consultations was that students worked with real-life organizations and applied to a real-life grant, or at least wrote a real-life grant. Whether the organization submitted it or not was up to them. But so I developed a class where students worked in groups of 4 or 5. Each one was partnered with a different community-based organization or agency in either Washtenaw County, Dearborn, or Detroit. So these included organizations like LGBT Detroit, CHAS, a neighborhood service organization, Access in Dearborn. More locally here in Washtenaw County, we're working with organizations like the YMCA, Packard Health, and a few on-campus organizations as well, like the Spectrum Center. There is every year a Michigan Health Endowment Fund grant. It's for $100,000. There's a call for proposals. And so we thought that was a good opportunity, and it's pretty general. It's with the aim of improving health in communities in Michigan, right? So we thought that would be a good sort of general grant that would be real life. So their final assignment was the call for proposals. You have to write to this, essentially. So again, that gave them that real life opportunity. And with the help of the Ginsberg Center, lined up 18 different community organizations, which I'm sure all of you can appreciate is no small task to line those up. And the key part here, which really changed everything for the class was that these organizations were saying, this is the program we need. So it wasn't a group of students saying, hypothetically, we want to create X program, but it was based on community needs and the organization's responses. So the student groups wrote this, met with the organizations 3 different times throughout the semester. They wrote a proposal, a budget, a work plan, and then they also identified other funding sources so that in addition to this one. So this was sort of the new structure, and I want to share with you a little bit about kind of what was the feedback from students and the organizations. So first off, the bickering among student groups essentially disappeared because they were hyper-focused on serving these community organizations. There was no longer, bickering about what health topics should we focus on, what does this thing look like. It was all driven by community need. And so it was amazing to work with these individual student groups it all came back to just wanting to serve the community. And I think that speaks really highly of the students that they were dedicated like that, but it also made my job as an instructor easier. At the end of the course, they loved being able to step out of the classroom and actually see how an organization works. And I will be completely honest with you, a few of these partnerships fell flat, right? The organization changed their mind several different times about what they wanted. In some cases, it was a mismatch with this proposal. But nonetheless, those types of experiences the students had an opportunity to learn from because we built in, again with the help and recommendation from Ginsberg Center, built in a lot of reflection throughout the semester. So even as these bumps in the road occurred, it was a learning experience rather than a flaw or a problem. And then the final thing is that students now, and I've actually been hearing this especially from students that are now looking for jobs, they're pointing to this experience as something that they've actually done. Yes, I've written a grant to the Michigan Health Endowment Fund, right? Which is different than saying, yes, I did a final assignment in this class. And then some of these organizations they're still connected with, they've moved into internships or are thinking of as potential jobs down the line. So that's, from the student perspective, a big win. The other thing that Ginsberg helped me out with was thinking about how do we have an evaluation with the community partners at the end of the semester. So how do I get the feedback and the follow-up about how this worked for them? And I was extremely impressed that the feedback that I did get was overwhelmingly positive. So with the consultation, we sort of created some questions that really allowed negative feedback because people don't always want to give negative feedback. They're generally appreciative, so they're hesitant to say something. So we phrased some questions in a way that was like, all right, like this is what we need. We need the what would we change? And every single community organization said we wouldn't change a thing. It worked out really great. And every single organization that responded said, yes, I want to participate again. I mean, assuming that we have another need for next year, but yes, I'd like to participate again. And so I thought that really spoke highly of this course and structure working well for the community organizations. And it was in large part because of the consultation to Ginsberg, who has had I myself was doing this essentially for the first time. They have experience consulting on this across many courses in different settings. So I couldn't have done it without them. And so the final thing I just want to mention is this connection between public engagement and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So as I mentioned before, because students were coming to me in my very first months here, how do I cope with what's going on in the world? How do I cope with what's going on campus? I became very involved in some of the DE&I initiatives at the School of Public Health and in my department. And so it was really important to me to also be weaving that into this particular course. And what I found, especially in this, once I had this new format, is that we could talk in a very significant way about issues that are central to diversity and equity and inclusion because we were working out in the community. So these conversations became deeper and more real. So the first time I taught it, we did cover things such as how does your identity play a role in kind of working with communities. We talked about power inequalities. We talked about how structures are set up, that might favor some groups over others. But again, those conversations were a bit flat because it was all in this hypothetical space. With this new model where we were actually out working with partners, so we were out working in Dearborn, in Detroit, areas of Washtenaw County, when we brought up issues of how identity might affect your work out in a community, when we brought up issues of power dynamics between a university and a community organization, when we brought up issues of power dynamics between levels of leadership, different identities, etc., they had these concrete examples to draw on. So students were chiming in, oh, I've seen with this organization, this is how it's worked, or reflecting on our last meeting with this organization, the power dynamics in the room were this way or that way. And so we could go much, much deeper. And then also students were bringing in the examples. So it wasn't on me as the instructor to say, okay, so here's a case study of here's what might happen, but rather students were bringing in, here's what just happened at our last meeting, or here's what they brought up. This community organization brought up something that seems problematic. How would we work through this? And so that was a real opportunity that I felt like we went a lot deeper in some of these topics that are very central to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then we're also able to connect that to what was going on at the university itself. So obviously a lot of the class was focused on these community partners, but also thinking about the university and our department and our school is a group that has hierarchy. It has different people with different identities. It has different structures that are favoring some over others, and they were able to connect that back to the DE&I initiatives in the school. So I really feel like when you're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but only focusing in the campus community, you're missing out on this other piece, which is our wider community. And if you're doing public engagement out in the real world with partners, it's a real opportunity to bring in some of these issues of diversity and equity and inclusion. So they really partner well. So with that, I just want to highly encourage folks to reach out to Ginsberg. I couldn't have done what I did without their help. They're they've been extremely useful, and I think on your tables there is a beautiful handout from them, so you can take a look at them. But in particular, if you're a faculty teaching a course, they can help you, again, make your vision a reality and really think about how to build in this engagement. But I also want to encourage you, speaking for somebody who is a relatively new faculty, remember that your new faculty in your departments or ones you're connected to don't always know about these resources. So encourage them to reach out. And I would certainly say that a 1 hour meeting or a 2 hour meeting saved me hours and hours of planning, right? So it is an investment, but it ultimately saves time, and ultimately is also the cheerleader you need to be able to tackle something new like this, right? So just the kind of encouragement to try something new. So thank you for the opportunity to share this. Appreciate your attention.
Thanks very much. It's great to be here and part of this nice session today. I look forward to telling you a little bit about a few different outreach initiatives that I've been involved with at the Department of Chemistry. There have actually been a lot of partnering organizations here. They're sort of summarized on the slide here, and I'll highlight a few ways that I've interfaced with these different groups and different types of activities over the past couple of years. Okay, so I think one of the first messages I would like to give here is that even though I work primarily with a research lab doing work in the chemistry building, I also teach large classes, and so the top slide is my research group of mostly postdocs and PhD students. I teach classes up to about 400 people in the chemistry building, so lots of access to undergraduates. That's at the sophomore organic level, but I've also last year had started a new CSP class, which is a companion class to those large courses, and so that's really been a great experience because it gives me a chance in a really small setting to kind of work with them through some of the challenges that they face in this initial course that, you know, doesn't admittedly have the best reputation sometimes for people coming into it, but it's a nice way to connect with them and help to improve their experience throughout that course. And so really it's, I would say, the intersection of scholarship and teaching and outreach is very important to me. So I don't look at the outreach as something that's just an add-on, as a separate thing that I do, but it definitely is very closely integrated with the things that I do in my research lab and the teaching mission that I have. And so I think it's a nice way to sort of view all of this as a integrated component of the kind of things that we do. Okay, so I'll maybe first begin just by talking about a few initiatives that I've been involved with that are really parts of very large initiatives. So that's certainly a nice way to get into the activities very easily as a faculty who may not have a lot of experience with this, but some of the kind of things that we've done, I have my research group that's been out to the Michigan State Science Festival. This upper right panel is one of the events that we did there. It was great because we probably saw over 500 people come by our booth and talking about different kind of chemistry experiments and the role of chemistry in society. So that was a great way for my graduate students and me to interface with the group. I'm also part of an NSF center that's based out of Emory University. They have a very large outreach and engagement component to that center, and so they actually flew up a few people from Emory University to join us in that event. And so it was very nice to be able to sort of integrate that outreach mission with things that were very important to one of the grants that I participate in through the National Science Foundation. Also, I would just highlight that FEMS is a group that's designed for bringing in young girls from the Detroit area to the chemistry building several times a year. They have a capstone event with a large event in one of the lecture halls, but also a lot of the groups have these breakout sessions. So the rest of these pictures are things where my group and I were interacting with a group of about 20 girls in different sessions throughout the day, sort of talking about chemistry and the role in society. And so these were, you know, really nice initiatives that were some of the earlier things that we had done several years ago to sort of get integrated with the outreach opportunities that really took part in these larger organizations. And again, I'll just highlight that these were things that have really given me a chance to strengthen my scholarship and grant applications. And so the upper left panel were some things from the Emory-based reporting to the National Science Foundation that really highlighted the things that we're able to do at the Michigan State Science Festival. This bottom right graphic is one from a T32 training grant I just submitted to the National Institutes of Health that basically talked about the kinds of outreach that we've done with the trainees that are part of that training grant. And so I think these opportunities to explain chemistry to the broader public, you know, get young people excited about STEM fields and take steps towards recruiting a diverse workplace are very important components to the funding agencies. And so it's been nice to sort of have that as a strength of the scientific parts of applications that I have going in to support my research group. And so from there, I'd like to say a little bit about the Wolverine Express trip that I went on to Chandler Park. This is a great experience. I went with two of my students, Hillary and Wes, shown in the bottom graphic with me at Chandler Park in Detroit. And so we basically had a great experience of being able to meet with other participants going over to the session. We met with a lot of staff from the school to talk about what their needs were. We had a really nice bus trip over there and back where we had a chance to brainstorm about outreach activities. And so this was very different from the other kind of things that I had previously participated in, because I typically had demonstration-based activities with the students, where this is one where we didn't bring any chemicals with us over to the schools, but it was really a chance for us to talk about, you know, really what our paths were getting into the scientific field, think about the college admissions process, you know, what do chemists do? Is it, you know, talk about the things like opportunities in patent law and scientific writing and all the other kind of things that they could do that go way beyond the typical laboratory jobs that they probably associate with chemistry. So I think they were interested to hear a lot about these kind of things and just get a little more information about the process of applying to school and thinking about going to a big place like the University of Michigan. So that was really a unique opportunity for me to be able to learn from the group in terms of the kind of ways that we could outreach with the public here. But at the same time, I was cognizant of the fact that the students that I met with were very engaged, very appreciative, but it didn't change the fact that I was, an older white guy going into this classroom that didn't have a lot in common with the paths of these students. And so sort of thinking about that in ways that I could, potentially, connect even better to student groups like this, it made me realize that the connections I'd made with the CSP class were a really interesting opportunity, because these were students, I think you all probably know some about the Comprehensive Studies program. This got a little bit of their mission statement on the top there, but it's basically, I thought was a great opportunity, because the CSP students in many cases, come from the communities nearby where we'd really like to be doing better outreach, and we thought it would be a great opportunity to connect with them. Also, I would say the students have been extremely interested in really being able to give back to their communities and really have a nice connection for outreach to their high schools, because sometimes getting in the door is the hard part with these kind of things. But it was easy for me just to say, hey, call your college chemistry teacher and see if they'd like us to come back to the school. And also, I would say it's a way for me to improve my personal outreach, but also a nice way for me to, further cement my relationship with the CSP students, because it gives us a time outside of the classroom to really work together and really develop that, student-faculty relationship, as well as developing the outreach opportunities. So we thought this was kind of a win-win situation that would give us lots of nice connections to be able to make. And so basically, after I had taught the CSP class the first time of 40 students, I just sent one quick email out to the group saying, hey, I'd be interested in going back to your high school with you if you live close by. Shoot me an email if you'd like. And I ended up with, I think, maybe a dozen of the 40 students emailing me back, saying, yes, let's try to set this up. And so I've done this with 2 of the students now, and I have 3 others that we're trying to set up trips with. And so a lot of the students live too far away, so it's actually probably a better success rate than I get on my teaching evaluations in terms of the students that were interested in being able to come up here. So I'll tell you a little bit about the two trips that I've taken with CSP students and the kind of things that we did. The first of these was a student, Sophia, that was in my CSP class that basically was the one shown in this on the slide in the top right graphic, where we had met in a lecture hall and invited a group from the Ann Arbor Public School System to come into the chemistry building. She had been a product of the Ann Arbor Public Schools, and so it was a great opportunity for the students to really see her path. And I think that the students were all really appreciative, but you could see there was a special connection with the young girls that could see the woman that had just come through their path. And so I thought it was a really nice opportunity to show them that kind of opportunity. And so we had a great day. We basically went through a laser lab shown on the bottom left. We set up the laboratories for them to do a purple cabbage color indicator experiment where they were dressed up in lab coats and goggles. So lots of interesting things there. Our glass blower is a very exciting person, as you can see from the looks on their faces, of seeing the activities going on here, and a few more activities in the labs as well. So Sophia was just a fantastic participant in this group. The rest of the people were basically the students from my research laboratory, but that was a really nice opportunity to take advantage of. And just the last thing I'll mention is I had another student that went to John Glenn High School in Westland, and so rather than having their students come here, we decided to go out to their school and we gave a joint presentation together. And so Kay was able to really connect into the students and show that it's really the path from that exact classroom into U of M. So she was able to stand up with them and talk about the opportunities at Michigan, thinking about how to fit in at a large university, getting involved in research and campus activities. How do you pay for it? How do you navigate financial aid, choosing a major? So this is really, very nice for her to show these kind of stories to the students. And so then jointly, we were able to follow up on that conversation, talk more about things like, how do you connect with the faculty at a place as big as this? So I think I could tell that story, she could tell that story, but we thought that for the two of us to be up there in their classroom together was maybe a better illustration of the kind of relationships that students are able to develop with their faculty, even at a very large university like this. And you're getting into the support mechanisms like CSP, and then I could sort of talk more about the opportunities in science and the things like this. Very similar to things that were motivated by the Wolverine Express trip. Was really a nice opportunity. And so we have, in addition to this, visits planned in Southfield and in the Warren, Michigan, and in Flint. So we have a few of these that are currently planned, and a few others potentially in the works. Okay, so it really just remains for me to thank the people in my lab, the CSP group, The NSF Center has been very helpful. The FEMS organization and Sherry and Kim have really been a fantastic resource. And so I think really having the time with them to talk about how to best conduct these trips was extremely informative for me in thinking about different ways to do these types of activities. The last thing I wanted to mention is I apologize if I appear underdressed. I was an undergraduate with Michael Jordan at UNC, so I've been fielding questions all week about where my allegiance falls for the game tonight. So I had to wear the black M to show my commitment to the school. Okay.